Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how our Brexit government has turned down an opportunity to have a seat at the table of international decision making, seemingly because of Brexit ideology that I doubt makes sense even to most Brexiteers. But I'm going to try to explain why we're making this insane decision. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, the secret to the success of the EU is essentially the Allure of Trade. It's the most successful peace project in history because it bound previously warring European powers together through interdependent trade. For one power to go to war against another would bring economic catastrophe. So they don't. And as previously warring powers worked together in their now common interests, their political power grew. Because where there is economic might, there is political might. But when the UK chose to leave the EU, we were surrendering a lot of that international influence. The UK is not exactly a minnow on the world stage, but that influence was magnified as a major player in the EU. And one thing that really highlighted this for me was a few years ago when the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke and then it was discovered that Facebook had had some murky dealings in it. Mark Zuckerberg had questions to answer about Facebook's role in the con. Everyone wanted to talk to him. American legislators demanded he turn up for questioning, and he did. EU legislators demanded he turn up for questioning, and he did. UK legislators demanded he turn up for questioning, and he told us to piss off. I'll send an underling instead. They're good enough for you, he said. That was his response. A perfect example of the international influence of a country compared with the coordinated might of lots of countries. If Zuckerberg had ignored the EU, there would have been consequences. But there were no consequences for him. He was actually right not to turn up to our parliament because there were no consequences for him. He could ignore us, so he did. Brexit has weakened our international standing and we need to rebuild it. This should not even be a partisan issue. The Tory Brexiteers talked about global Britain. So when the EU says, well, we'd like to work with you on areas of common interest, surely even the Tories should be interested. One of the big things I poke at with Brexit is that loss of international influence. Well, surely this would be a way of them saying, oh, no. Yes, granted, it's going to be a little bit different, but we're going to re-establish a new role. This would be evidence of them doing it. Regardless of what came in any discussions at such a summit, it would have great optics for Brexit. It would make us look important because the EU are reaching out to us. They want our input. It doesn't involve following any EU rules, doesn't require any political alignment with the EU at all. But we've turned it down. Not even discussed the pros and cons and then turned it down, I gather. Just turned the idea down flat. A perplexed Brussels has said, well, China engages us in summits like this. Why wouldn't the UK? And before I try and approach that question, let's look at what we miss out here. First of all, one largely unreported consequence of Brexit is we lost our behind-the-scenes chats in Brussels. If, as applies to most people, you are living in the country in which you grew up, as I am, if you're watching this channel, you're almost certainly interested in politics, but mostly you'll be interested in the politics of your own country. Like you show an interest in the politics of other countries when there's something exciting or crazy going on, as happens a lot in Britain these days. But how much do you really know about the political nuances of other countries? Unless you're really interested in international politics, the chances are not a lot. Well, it's the same for politicians even. Most politicians in the EU countries don't really get the nuances of British politics. It all just looks a bit crazy. These days it is a bit crazy, but it often looks it even when it's normal. And the way we used to deal with this is they would talk to British politicians and officials in Brussels. We'd all meet up. We would just off the record meetings over a cup of coffee or whatever. We would explain the political reality in our country. They would explain the political reality in their country. And behind the scenes, we built up an understanding which allowed us to work on policies of common interest. That's not happening now. There are no British politicians or officials in Brussels. You know, there might be the odd politician who understands British politics as a sort of hobby, but not that many. So now the UK is an enigma. We don't have those behind the scenes conversations. So we only ever have the formal conversations where neither side understands the other's position. And it's very hard for productive cooperation to take place when you're just not having these sort of friendly, off the record discussions. As a result, the EU say they want to engage with the UK on matters we share an interest in. There's no obligation on either side, no rules which have to be followed, no strings attached. It would allow us to pool our resources on matters we both find important. And if one side says, actually, we're not going to do that, that's fine. You've had a talk about it. Okay, you're not going to cooperate in this area. But we have just turned down the chance. And people in the EU just don't understand why. Because those little meetings in the canteens and corridors of Brussels are just not taking place. So allow me to explain the nuance in British politics which caused us to turn it down. We have a government of ministers whose brains will replace with pickled cabbage. You're welcome. But more seriously, it's because the party of government is at war with itself. I saw someone asking today why Labour and the Lib Dems aren't all over the worst Brexit news when it's going to cause so much damage to businesses and people. Why aren't Labour and Lib Dems jumping on it? And the answer's the same. The Tories are at war with each other. That's why. The only thing which has bound the various factions together since 2019 is Brexit. On everything else, they disagree. The Tories would dearly love to unite behind that mythical version of Brexit again. Labour and the Lib Dems understand this and they're not giving them the opportunity. Labour, of course, plan on converging with the EU as much as possible. They will absolutely not be turning down opportunities to take part in summits like this. But until they're in government, they need to keep the focus on more normal economic issues, like, jobs, cost of living, but healthcare, climate change as well for the election. Because not only is that what the voters want to hear them talking about, but also those are the areas which divide the Tories, all of them. In fact, climate change is really dividing them right now. So much so I may talk about that in a separate video tomorrow or so. But going back to this confusion about turning down summits with the EU, it's because it pokes the hornet's nest. Tobias Ellwood aside, where Tory MPs and Brexit are concerned, they're either energetically trying to crowbar it into every conversation, or they're trying to avoid talking about it at all costs. Being seen to be working with the EU as we once did, even without obligations, without political alignment, would be seen as moving back within the orbit of the EU, red rag to a bull where the Brexit purists in the Tory party are concerned. They're okay with Sunak going along for a cup of tea, although they'd still rather he didn't do that. But the idea of actually working with the EU on a project galls them. We're even delaying our entry to Horizon because these Brexit lunatics are arguing against that. This is why we won't take a seat at the table, even when it comes with no strings attached. Our government has been taken over by a Brexit death cult. The national interest, not their concern. The political self-interest of their own party, not their concern. Only almighty Clulu is their concern, and Clulu is batshit crazy. In fact, let me show you just how paranoid the government are about anything to do with the EU. Happily, serendipitously, there was a tweet I saw this morning. You think the Tories are softening a bit because Rishi Sunak appears a bit more friendly to our neighbours? Someone tweeted a communique from civil servants which referred to Brexit as divergence from nearby international markets. Nearby international markets. Now, there's only one international market anywhere we're diverging from. It is nearby. It's the only nearby international market. They mean the EU. That's what they mean. They won't say it, though. The suggestion here is that officials have been told to not even refer to the EU now. No, it's nearby international markets. It's one market. That's the benefit, you see. Because they don't want to upset the Brexit purists. And this isn't new. There was a period, just as we were leaving the EU, but just before the pandemic hit, there was those few weeks when Boris Johnson was ordering officials, don't use Brexit, don't use the term Brexit, don't refer to it in any of your planning, because he wanted people to think Brexit happened when we left the EU. He didn't want people associating it with at the end of the year when we left the single market and customs union. Did not want people associating the word Brexit with what was to come. But of course, with COVID cover, he then dropped that edict for a while because he thought it was safe to talk about Brexit because anything bad happening, he would blame on the pandemic. Even the stuff that wasn't happening in other countries. Oh, no, it's the pandemic. Well, why isn't it happening in France? Oh, stuff. But it's the same mindset. Do not speak the name of the beast. That you cannot even say the EU. There's absolutely zero chance of any political normality or economic pragmatism while these people are in charge. They're just crazy. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.